Hello, I am Barbara Schack. I'm going to be the host of the call. This is the first community call of the Internet of Production Alliance for this year. Actually, just like we did in February last year, we have one speaker who's going to take us on a deep dive on one topic. This is maybe becoming a thing. We turned it into a podcast last time and quite a long blog post. So maybe this is something we can also do, Donaldo. But before we jump into that, we do have the usual community updates so that we keep all of you up to date on some of the more project work that the Alliance is doing. And Andrew, who's the chair of the Alliance, is going to be presenting that. Before that, a couple of housekeeping things. In the chat, there is the link to the notepad on which we all take notes. It's very helpful if everyone does, because while I'm screen sharing, I can't be taking the notes. This call is going to go online, so do turn off the video if you don't want to be on YouTube. And a general recommendation to remain very polite. Not everybody knows each other, so on the chat while you're speaking, if you're turning on your video, please don't roll your eyes, even if it doesn't have anything to do with us. All of those things, we're digital, but we do act as if we were all in person. Yeah, I'm going to dive into it right after this. I will share my screen because I have slides, or we all have slides to look at. So the call this month, we're going to be looking at something called Grokker, and Donaldo Almazan is here to tell us about that. As I said, we're going to have some updates, and then we're just going to be talking about Grokker. And I really hope there's a lively discussion because I don't know about you all, but I knew nothing about this ahead of this invitation. So here are the notes. And Andrew, over to you for the updates.
Thank you very much, Barbara, and big thanks to Donaldo for getting involved in the Internet of Production community last year and for being willing to share your work on Grokker with us today. Happy New Year, everyone. I know it's mid-February, but I'm one of those annoying people that thinks it's funny to say Happy New Year in September even. And of course, if you are celebrating the Lunar New Year, then it is only just Happy New Year as well. So a few updates from the Internet of Production Alliance. The main thing that is really exciting to share with you all is the MAKE project. This is the African European Makerspace Ecosystems project, and it's an initiative run by 9 organizations that have formed a consortia. We're now in the final year of that project. It's good to see you here today, Joseph and Anna, who've been very involved in that project. Joseph is with the African Makerspace Network. And the big thing for the Internet of Production this year is that we'll be doing a trial of a distributed manufacturing system. Last year, the focus was on developing a people and skills specification so that we can more easily compare skills from one makerspace to another and build up profiles around individual makers. We have an understanding. We have Antonio on the call here today. He's in charge of the data systems that we've put in place around the Open Nowhere data standard, which is you know where you can make things. The people and skills side of things is the who. And this year, we're going to be doing some work on distributed contracting, building on some offline trials that we had last year to distribute contracts to make things across this African and European makerspace ecosystem. So it's an exciting year for us. If I may say so, one of the things I'm particularly interested in doing over the course of 2024 is seeing how we might take some of the work that we've done in the MAKE project in Africa and Europe to other geographies, the United States, to there's a group of organizations in Iraq of makerspaces across Iraq that are interested in it, to places like South Asia, perhaps. So particularly interested in taking that project. I'll put the link in the chat momentarily, so you can sign up to the newsletter for that project. But yeah, we'll be doing some field trials with distributed contracts where we get lots and lots of things made in lots of different places. But the idea is to have just one order without having to have one order per thing made in per place, per producer. So it really is a bit of a test for the value of the Internet of Production. The one of the things we did last year, and you know, it took us by surprise because we didn't think that this kind of project funding would be available, is we worked on something called the Innovative Manufacturing in Africa project, which specifically looked at makerspaces in international development outcomes. The MAKE project is more focused on innovation. It's a European innovation project. Innovative Manufacturing in Africa is a British aid project, and they funded 9 makerspaces across the African continent, but in 3 countries: Kenya, South Africa, and Ghana. We're looking to expand that this year to bring in makerspaces from Nigeria, and I'm in the process of finalising and hopefully very soon signing the contract to allow us to continue to work on capacity building makerspaces. Now, makerspaces aren't everything that we do at the Internet of Production. We do a lot of work on standards, as you've heard, and the open hardware movement, for example. But makerspaces we see as being part of the the hubs, the local hubs of manufacturing networks in many parts of the world. So that it's where the Internet of Production is spending quite a bit of time, particularly in 2024. I was hoping to be able to report to you by now whether a large funding bid that we put together around developing the community, the Internet of Production community, and the ecosystem, by which we mean sort of governance side of things, communication side of things, for the alliance for this community, would have been, whether that grant had been awarded by now. We applied to something called the US National Science Foundation Pathways for Open Source Ecosystems, and we've been in touch with the donors this week, but they've told us we're not ready to announce yet. They're still reviewing the bids, even though we applied in September. So watch this space. That could be a big, that could really enhance what we're doing with the Internet of Production community this year if that comes through. And it's the kind of work that we could use with other donors if that doesn't get funded this year. And I wanted to draw your attention to the next community call, which will be on the 12th of March. And it will contain, perhaps amongst some other things, depending on how the timetable works out, a review of what we've done around over the last 2.5 years on developing standards and developing the Alliance community. This was some work funded by the Alpha Peace Loan Foundation. So it'll be a bit of retrospective on what we've done over the last 2.5 years with that work. But that's enough about the Alliance for today, unless there's any questions. Great. Well, in that case, let's go over to Donaldo. And I think you have a presentation to share as well, Donaldo.
Hi, yes. So I can go ahead and switch.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and good luck, and thanks again for doing this.
All right, thank you so much. Let's see. All right. I'll go into presentation mode. Yeah, so yes, thank you, Andrew and Barbara, for inviting me to give this presentation of some of the work that I've been helping out with the Community Systems Working Group. this is work that has been continuously evolving for the past year and a half. I initially pitched this back in December, just as I've been sitting in on a lot of the Internet of Production working group calls, and have this AI project, decentralized infrastructure work that I think could be really interesting to share out. And so just really happy to try to get some fresh eyes on this work, and try to get a understanding of how much this stuff is relevant to this community, and at the same time starting that conversation around AI tools and infrastructure tools. I'm sure that other people in the Internet of Production community are also working on AI projects or interested in learning more. So I think it's, to me, just a really great opportunity to also collaborate with any other people in the group. And you might notice that I slightly edited this heading. So, as we evolved, we kind of branded a new section of this project as Promise Grid, which I will talk more in detail in a bit. So So then, as I mentioned, this project is part of the Community Systems Working Group. We are a maker collective focused on developing open source infrastructures for organizing and managing community efforts. We are led by Steve Trudeau. He is the founder of infrastructures.org and was previously a VP of engineering at Chase, and so has worked many years in kind of building out large scale distributed infrastructures. And this group was formed back after the Nation of Makers 2022 virtual conference. So Andrew Lamb actually gave a presentation at that event, and that's how we were initially introduced to IOP. Steve played a big role in volunteering for the organization of the event. And while it ran successfully, it took a massive amount of both infrastructural effort and also human effort. So the initial goal was to figure out how we can organize and execute these types of projects better. So our mission is to eliminate as much of the administrative tasks that come with organizing communities. So we see some three main problems. So a reliance on ineffective third-party tools, with low budgets. It kind of tends to be, we use Google Forms and Google Docs and a free Zoom account, and so things get spread out across a whole bunch of third-party tools that don't tend to talk with each other. And then also just the way that computers interact with each other in the current day causes some silos of information due to just the limitations of distributed networking. And a huge problem is also, what this leads to is then dependency on one leader in the organization or a few leads managing a lot of the coordination, and then that leads to burnout, and then that then the organization tends to start to decay. And so we're interested in uplifting decentralized and distributed communities, so open source projects, the maker community at large, so manufacturing networks and other nonprofit and social impact initiatives. And so I used the phrases decentralized and distributed, and I might kind of interchange them a few times, but just to give some context, so a distributed network, you can think of, a kind of takes the idea of a centralized server and kind of expands it out so that you have these sub nodes that then can distribute some of the workload. But at the end of the day, distributed networks still rely on centralized servers to kind of carry out a bulk of the effort and still kind of depend on those central servers. In a decentralized network, each node can carry out and execute functionality without a hierarchy, and so then these are more self-organized systems. And so then that introduces the larger project that the Community Systems Working Group is working on, that we're branding as Promise Grid. So it is a decentralized hosting network. And so it is a web-based infrastructure that offers P2P network communication and real-time collaboration. And we are building this using WASM technology, so WebAssembly. So you can see here, Grokker is an AI tool, but that is one of many, community toolings that we hope to develop over time. So, tools for documentation and scheduling and messaging, and, try to build up on this decentralized network. And the concept of Promise Grid is also kind of inspired by the Promise theory by Mark Burgess, and the concept of coordinating self-organized groups and his kind of research in that field. And so today I'll be discussing Grokker, which utilizes large language models, and we are interested particularly in large language models as a tool for coordinating systems. So we find that in the maker community, people come from a wide variety of backgrounds and experiences, and are often really eager to work with each other. But there tends to be different skill sets and terminologies, and so with large language models, we find that we can bridge the gaps between technical and non-technical teams and have people work more effectively with each other. Another interesting point that we've kind of been exploring is the concept of language-based consensus versus price-based consensus. So an AI tool for reaching agreement through qualitative consensus versus the more traditional decentralized or form of consensus making, like in blockchain, which kind of follows a paradigm that is kind of traditional global financial systems of boiling everything down to a price and then kind of creating that virtual market to try to create decisions. We think that LLMs can provide us a way to kind of sidestep that need to kind of price out decisions and kind of form consensus in that way. And so what is Grokker? So Grokker is a tool for interacting with your local files and such as documents and code. So this is currently, in its current state, a local tool that you would download into your machine, and uses OpenAI's API of GPT-4 to query and generate documents and code. So some of the features are that you can feed it multiple different files and then interact with those files and get context across that file directory. It has a local vector database And we also can structure the outputs using regex. And so then to give some more context on that feature, so regular expression or regex is a pattern that describes a set of strings. So you can basically think of it as a pattern that can filter out and kind of structure the output that you want. And so OpenAI's GPT-4 reads and writes regex extremely well. We think it's because, it's been trained on, libraries in regex. And thus we can use regex for generating formatted outputs and very consistently. So here's just a simple example. So, what is the color of the sky? Your output must match this regex. And then you can see this kind of pattern, and then the output, would be, color equals blue. And so then now I'll share some 3 different example use cases that are exploring Grokker's capabilities. So one is querying documentation, 2 generating structured outputs and kind of what that means. And then finally, an experimental feature that we've been exploring, which is multi-agent creation. So Grokker can query information from a lot of different text-based documents. In this case, I had pulled a syringe pump project from the Open Know-How's search directory and pulled in from the GitHub repo kind of the documentation that included the assembly instructions, troubleshooting, calibration, and the README. And so I will attempt to do a quick demo of this. So here is the GitHub. I've already kind of added those files into my directory. And so I, went into my command line, and I'm currently in this folder. So then doing, grok, q. Well, first I can say grok, help, or grok h. This gives you the list of all the commands that are available to you. So then q, asks the knowledge basic question. So I do grok q, and I say, in this example, I've assembled the syringe pump. So then, why isn't my screen working? And so then as I submit that question, it gets fed into OpenAI server and connects you with this database, and then says, here you get the answer. The issue could be related to the connectors of the screen cable. Customers have reported this problem. Try cutting off the plastic key and rotating the connector in the socket. So then this is just a simple example of how you could query using Grokker. Do a query in text-based files. And so then a second demo is generating and editing structured outputs. And before I go into that demo, I'll kind of give the input looks a little bit more complicated. So, now we are using the Grok chat function. So then the chat function allows you to have a conversation with the AI that's multi-step. So it remembers the conversation. So the question that you gave it, in previously, and it can kind of follow along with the chat in similar ways to how, OpenAI's ChatGPT would work. So in this case, we are creating a CAD model using OpenSCAD. So we're using Grokker to actually create code. So we say write an OpenSCAD file that contains a blue sphere that is 1 millimeter in diameter on top of a cube, 2 millimeters on each side. And so Grokker will generate this system message that it will send to OpenAI that could then tell it that what you want to do is create, an OpenSCAD file. And then here I've highlighted, this is what, is really great about regex and kind of showcases the example of what the regex would look like for this case. So it says, your response must include the following file and must match this regular expression. And so then I will do this as a video. So then, as you can see here, this is code at the bottom that was generated through that prompt. And so then when you open OpenSCAD, you can see that it created this initial file. What you'd notice is that the blue sphere doesn't look very much like a sphere. So then the great thing about Grok Chat is then you can make edits to that code. So then you can call Grokker again. And so then here we would say Grok Chat bar.chat. And then the -O is, creating specific for creating code. And so then we say make the sphere have 40 facets. And then, we enter that in. It creates the system message again. And then now in that same file that the code initially generated, now it made an update to the sphere's code and shows that the sphere is now specified as having 40 facets, so highlighted there. And then when you go back and open that file, now you have a sphere that looks much more like the intention. And so finally, we are exploring multi-agent production. And so to give just what that is, so we can create LLM agents and give them a specialized role and then have them work together to accomplish a more complex task. So like designing a website or creating, a video game. So then here, it's very much like role-playing with the AI tools and kind of creating these virtual organizations. And so you can tackle more complex tasks, do many-to-many coordination, and also benefit from an increased context window because each LLM agent will have, its own memory and then be able to kind of work off of each other's kind of shared skill sets. And so for a simple example, we told the AI agents to develop a Pong game. And so then we were able to successfully have them develop and design this functional Pong game. So we see, a paddle on each side, a ball that moves, back and forth. They are controlled by arrow keys, and there is, a scoring mechanism at the top. And so how we were able to accomplish this is that each agent was given their own Git branch. And so then a human agent begins with, a requirements.md file. So we say, I would like a Pong game that is written in Python. and then you would submit that change to the repo, and then the AI agents would detect that change and create updates to their respective output file. So from the requirements.md of, I would like a Pong game, we have a facilitator AI agent that creates the tasks. So it says, a Pong game has paddles and a scoring mechanism and a ball that moves back and forth. So it creates all those tasks and necessary aspects for the game, and then pushes that back into the repo. And then the Pygame developer AI agent then generates Python code in pong.py. So makes its attempt to tackle all of those tasks, pushes those tasks, that code, and then the tester agent, verifies whether that code makes sense. So kind of giving a second look at code, using AI to give a second look to AI generated code often can lead to fixing some, common errors. So the tester agent can see the pong.py game and the task.md and the requirements and say, hey, does this code fulfill those requirements? And so then creates a test results markdown file that says, yes, this has a paddle and a ball and a scoring mechanism. And so it successfully passes, and then it sends that off to the repo. And then a human agent can look at the code and kind of then edit any one of these files to make corrections or make adjustments and start the iterative process all over again. And so in our simple example, each agent was only writing to one respective file. So the developer could only write, or we specified that the developer would only write to pong.py. But in the case that two agents are editing, multiple files or the same file, then merge conflicts may occur. Surprisingly, these AI agents are very good at resolving their own conflicts, and the agents can gracefully resolve the results because they can see, all the files. And so if you define, the requirements.md file and the intent of the project, then the AI agent can make, decisions to, choose which, merge changes to accept. And so some potential use cases that we see for natural language processing and LLMs within Internet of Production, we see it's an incredibly flexible tool. And just throwing some ideas out there that we're curious about exploring. So reading and generating files from the open know-how, search directory, and maybe editing, manifest files or generating manifests, using AI and natural language processors to be matching agents for the open know-how project. So connecting makers and maker spaces, with contracts for what to make and being able to coordinate those decisions. And then also, helping makers generate, business models, through the open business model catalog. And so some work in progress, we're migrating the Grokker tool from a local CLI control line interface to Promise Grid. And so then creating that web-based UI, exploring the multi-agent modes of production, and then other community tooling, such as event hosting and collaborative editors. And so, we're really interested in, collaborators or contributors, or just anybody who's interested in learning more. And so I created this feedback form. You can also reach out to me on the Internet of Production forum. I'll also send my LinkedIn and I'll send my email as well. And you can also sign up for our Google group to kind of get involved on the conversation around the work at Community Systems Working Group. And here are also the GitHub links for both Grokker and Promise Grid. And then you can also reach out to Steve through GitHub and also Twitter. So both his handles are Steve GT. And so then, yeah, thank you so much. And I can open it up for questions. And Steve will absolutely be here for answering some of those technical details that people might have questions about.
Thank you very, very much, Donaldo. Before I open up, I am in no doubt that there will be questions. So I'm not at all nervous about the Q&A part. But I just want to congratulate you in the spirit of that first requirement around Grokker and Promise, which was getting technical and non-technical people to collaborate together. I want to congratulate you on how pedagogical this presentation was. It's spot on. For someone who's not technical and someone who's technical, I'm pretty sure it answers those two. I actually have a question that I prepared. So please, everyone, start raising your hands, and we'll try to politely hand over who speaks when. I saw your question, Antonio, and I see you, Andrew. My question is around a use case that's mentioned, I think, in that last slide, potentially. Yesterday, we had the launch of the open source hardware directory, which is the IOP Open Know-how Initiative, people and other groups from GOSH and OSHWA that are looking at that. They are very much not intending on creating any new designs and documentations or repositories, etc. The core of what we want to be working on is being able to connect with what's out there already in terms of designs and documentation. And so from my understanding from reading documentation on GitHub, Grokker right now prefers to go through local files, but is also linked to the global documentation on OpenAI. Can you speak quickly to how you think Grokker would enable us to apply custom assets to filter relevancy of search results, so that, for example, you can look for an open source hardware project that has the design files, or that comes just from Appropedia, or how we could do the queries to take into account this filtering questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so yeah, as you mentioned, so the first step in kind of querying files starts with sending the file to some tool. In this case, we use OpenAI's another API function that OpenAI has to vectorize the file. So yeah, that it was an interesting case that we were exploring with the GOSH directory, because I initially kind of tried to get one of the YAML files, but then realized it was a link from a website, and so then in the current state, you would then kind of have to save that file. As Steve can talk about, as how we would try to get files from the internet without necessarily having somebody download them first in order to vectorize it. That makes sense.
Steve,
want me to dive in? So one thing that in the interest of time and simplicity, what Donaldo didn't show in his live demo that he did there where he was querying the syringe pump project markdown files was there is a step before you start talking to the files is there's a grok add subcommand. So if you can get the files on your local disk, then you say grok add. It's very similar to a git add if you've used git. So so you say grok add, and another thing that Donaldo, you didn't have, I was typing while you were talking, making notes here. You didn't have the vector database slide in the presentation anymore, right? Do you still have that in your pool? And you're muted.
Yeah, I think it was in the kind of side.
Oh, I must have been,
Oh, no.
looking at my other laptop when you had that slide up. So anyway,
Oh, no.
essentially that grok add command does the thing that Donaldo was talking about all the deep dark voodoo about adding data to the vector database so that it's searchable by the AI. So you say grok add, and after that you can have a conversation with the one or more files that you've done the add on. So that's pretty straightforward, but of course first you'd have to have those files on local disk. So I think that's where Donaldo was getting at about if the file is currently somewhere else on another machine, there would have to be some sort of a fetch that would have to take place there first. Right now, I don't have that the more complex logic that would want to be in Grokker, where it would be able to do those fetches by giving it a URL instead of a local file name, for instance. Another thing that I don't have in there yet is, for instance, being able to translate a PDF into text so that it can be indexed. That's something that both of those use cases, remote fetches or PDFs, are things that I just do manually still. Just use curl or my browser to download the file, and then if it's a PDF, I run it through a converter to text. Does that answer the question that you were asking, Barbara?
In a way, the idea down the line would be, can the search for the relevant files enable before needing to fetch, identifying what to fetch?
So the real problem there, just paraphrasing, you're saying is that first the user would have to know where the files are. In other words, there's an index that would be helpful there, right?
There is that's basically what they're gonna be looking at, is how can we find what we don't know
Right.
there.
So this is there's a whole nother presentation that,
Yeah.
that we have to do in order to be able to describe our own answer to that question, and it has to do with that promise grid thing. And the one sentence answer is, if you're hosting all of your stuff, websites, applications, and otherwise on one decentralized machine, everything's there, regardless of what node on the internet it's actually physically residing on. It's abstracted into one giant virtual machine. There's my one sentence answer, but that would be a whole nother presentation. So.
Intel. Antonio, Andrew, and then we've got Ebuka in the chat. In that order?
Antonio, I don't think we can hear your mic.
Sorry. Can you hear me now? Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Donaldo, Steve, Barbara. So I have a few comments on Grokker. The first is critical in the use of OpenAI. It's all like, and I see there is a question there in the chat, like, how is this different from using ChatGPT as a, and so I see Grokker as an orchestrator and a command baseline interface for the API, but so the main problem with using OpenAI API is like the obscurity of the entire process, and so I will like instead of looking on continuing using OpenAI, I won't think it's too crazy to train your own model. Like there is a vast resource of information like Fab Academy if you know Fab Academy, it's a huge source of information on how people thinks and organizes information around projects. And so I'm saying this because I'm very hesitant on using OpenAI because it's not very open, as the name states. And nowadays it is not that crazy to train your own models. So have you considered looking onto this direction? And the other question will be that I see with Grokker you are going through different scenarios and functionalities that are far away from one to the other. Like you have the functionality to talk to files and output files, and also you have the other one that is like to orchestrate groups of work, like, and you have defined like um roles in an organization. You can have like a maker virtual organization, but so these two are far away. So have you um consider like what is going to be your focus for the future developments of Grokker? Those are the two questions.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I can take on the first question. So yeah, that is something that we are absolutely focused on when migrating Grokker to kind of its new phase, which is kind of becoming AI LLM agnostic and being able to plug in your own LLM. So then that's around kind of creating an AI gateway so that then you can have either a Llama or OpenAI or even your own kind of trained model and point it to in that way. And I forget. And so then
Diverse functionality was the second question.
I say, yeah. I guess there is this larger, I can kind of share my screen. It might be a very confusing kind of diagram to showcase, but you can bear with me. And this kind of goes, I think, to somebody else's question of what's the difference between Grokker and ChatGPT. But so this is the current state of Grokker. It's a CLI tool that's built in Go. So it does kind of the context chunking and embedding, and kind of has a vector database and key value store, and uses OpenAI. So then moving on to the larger kind of WASM built, and as we were initially calling it WASM grid, but now it's Promise Grid. We would kind of create this version control system management kind of microservice and a container management microservice that is separate from this context chunking and embedding and cosine similarity search. And then here with the Promise Grid, as I mentioned, the AI gateway, so that you can in the future have a decentralized AI or an open source language model, and kind of the vector database then lives on a web host. So hopefully that answers that question.
I think also will require a few more conversations, but yeah. Congratulations on the vision. I mean, I don't really like the OpenAI at all, like, but I see the vision after that, and I think there's a lot of applications for one, like, the challenge here for the engineers and the makers is like, how do you help them to write documentation and the manifest in an easier way? So if you have come with something to help them, that is going to help solve a lot of pain in the maker community. So that, I think that's the nice vision for that. So thank you for your work.
All right, thank you.
So I can add a little bit there. Antonio, I share the same concerns. And the way I see it is it's a bootstrapping step. At one point, I think we had some language in one of the slides that Donaldo had where we actually used that term bootstrapping. It's this weird thing where we kind of have to use the tools that are there, including OpenAI, in order to bootstrap us into the situation where we don't need OpenAI. Does that make sense? So that's the way I see it anyway.
Yeah, makes sense. But there are other tools out there, so maybe try
Yeah.
to look
Well,
at
I
a little
actually,
bit.
Antonio, I'd like to talk to you more about those because mostly I've been looking at the stuff on Hugging Face. Donaldo, you want to throw the sign up slide back up again? And I've also put the Google form link in the Etherpad. If you want to put your contact information in there, Antonio, I'd like to continue this conversation with you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
I'll jump in here to mention that these calls often run over time, but there's 5 minutes left, and I will make sure there are 2 questions. Andrew has one, and then there is how is this different from ChatGPT or other AI tools? And if we can address those 2 questions briefly, and if Steve and Donaldo are available to stay longer, which they might not be, then we can also continue the conversation once that's wrapped up. Andrew, microphone to you.
Thanks, and thank you for a great presentation. It's a strange thing to have to do on Zoom because there are moments where it's like, yes, congratulations, that's fantastic. And I have 3 non-technical questions, and they can be quite quick. What does Grokker mean? Why did you choose that name? How are you funded? And if you can paint very quickly, given the time available, what does the future look like for communities when this thing is at scale?
Do you want me to take the Grokker one, Donaldo?
Yeah.
Andrew, Elon Musk stole my thunder by launching Grok in November after I've been using the name since March of 2023. If you've ever read Heinlein, specifically Stranger in a Strange Land, to Grok, something is to understand it so deeply that you become one with it.
Thank you. That's a great answer.
That's where the name came from. But
this is a tool to help you to understand Grokker.
Yeah. So let's see. Funding. Actually, I should take the second one too. Funding. Andrew, in real life, my wife and I run a family manufacturing business supplying things to the U.S. national labs and pretty much every aerospace company on the planet. And so we're doing okay with that, such that I have the time to work on this project. And also, we have a need for this project because as an old infrastructure guy myself, I am sick and tired of managing individual machines and containers and Kubernetes and all that kind of stuff. So I want that grid as the infrastructure for my own shop. So there's some very strong self-interest there in terms of financial support so far.
Thank you. And then what does the future look like when this is at scale?
I'm going to let you tackle that one, Donaldo, because if I try to, it's going to go on for too long.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I think that it's a big question, but I feel like with the web UI, we want it to be a simple process. So going back to, the maker community is made up of a whole bunch of people from different technical backgrounds. We don't want, the barrier of entry to be you have to download and install, this program, and you have to kind of do all these installations. So, at scale, we want it to be kind of, living on a website so that, you just share this URL, you can kind of generate your own kind of, working group where you share this URL with the teams, and then you have that kind of open collaboration that is very easeful and simple.
Thank you. I'm going to share this recording with a friend of mine who, his name's Kuldeep, he's a part of the Alliance as well, and he manages lots of projects in an innovation lab. And he was talking to me the other day about what I need is an AI that can answer questions and people can just talk to get people to understand the design, but also they can design the implementation together. So what you guys are doing hardware, but let's do the same thing for projects as well at some point. So thanks for these questions, and absolutely, let's see if there's ways that we can integrate the Internet of Productions work further with what you're doing.
Very much. I'm going to stop the recording now. If I find out where that button is. And then wait, actually, before I do that, there was a last question, which was, so can you tell us a bit about how this relates or is different from or adds on other AI tooling out there like ChatGPT? Like, is it the command line? Is it the link to OpenAI?
Yeah, the experience, or like the difference I think that I want to highlight, between Grokker and ChatGPT. So you are having this conversation and you can ask it, you go on the URL and you say, hey, I'd like code, and it kind of gives you this like summary of what it's doing, and then gives you this code snippet. And so then the process from there would be, then you copy and paste that to a local file. You go from your Chrome or web browser to your file, and then you kind of execute it and you try to see what it does, and then you can kind of like say, oh, I need a modification or I need an edit, so then let me go back to the web interface with ChatGPT and kind of give it some fixes or have a conversation with it. It'll try to create those edits. Then you have to copy in that snippet and go back to that file and make that edit yourself. I think what's really cool about Grokker is that it's all integrated and kind of unified with kind of your local, with the structured outputs. It creates that file for you already in your system, so then you can open it, run it, and see if you need any modifications, and then just send it any modifications you need, and then it'll work within that same file that you are also using, and so it can be a more collaborative experience. So that's one.
I have follow-up questions, but I was wondering if anyone else. Oh, Steve, you want to
Well,
add
I was just going to add, I'll try to keep it to one sentence, but when I originally wrote the tool back in early 2023, it was simply so that I could have a conversation with a friend's research paper. That friend happens to be Mark Burgess. He's the same guy that was mentioned in the presentation about the promise theory stuff. And Mark tends to make up his own terminology as he goes. But he's very, very smart and very insightful. And I really enjoy talking to him. And the thing about the large language models is they're very, very good at understanding language and terminology and quickly understanding made up terminology that's in someone's research paper. The first reason I wrote the thing was for that purpose, to be able to absorb a local document and be able to have a conversation with it. Now, since then, and this is to Antonio's point, since then, OpenAI has added the ability for you to upload your own documents, but that gives you even more lock-in to OpenAI. And so as long as you're able to keep your own documents in your own vector database on your own hard disk, it helps you avoid that habitual lock-in where we have yet another centralized service that we're dependent on without the flexibility of going somewhere else.
Right.
That was more than a sentence, but yeah. Does that answer your question better?
It does, actually. I would like to say a big thank you to everyone who showed up for the call and contributed to the conversation. Thank you. I'm aware a lot of people need to drop off now. I will keep the call open because I can sense that Donaldo and Steve seem to be willing to continue answering questions. I actually have one more, but Rebecca, Ziadi, Joseph, Richard, do you have any questions? Nope, happy to listen. Cool. Then my question follows up on the one on like the discussion we were just having, which is then I'll admit this is a question from Sarah, so I'm reading my notes to make sure that I understand the question. And basically, it's a data privacy question. Because from what I understand and from what she understands, we're having a chat conversation with the AI, right? And it is capturing, therefore, the questions to do this iterative loop, if I'm using the right vocabulary. But then again, Grokker is cool with people using their own vocabulary and explaining it back. So what is the data privacy question around the chat conversation? Because I wasn't sure if it was or wasn't saved from the presentation. It seems like it's saved from what we had understood of the Git repository. It wasn't. So for all the data privacy purists out there, can you tell us more about privacy issues?
So I do have a disclaimer at the bottom of the README for Grokker that addresses that, and what it says.
I saw it.
Yeah, you did see that. Yeah. So as long as we're using OpenAI as the backend servers, yes, everything that you enter and everything that you add to your local vector database does need to be sent to OpenAI servers for generating the embedding vectors, as well as later context when you're actually providing a prompt and getting an answer back. And so that's another reason why Antonio's questions were extremely valid, is that we want to get to the point where, no, we're not dependent on that third-party service. And this is the strange thing, is that this is not the first time in computer science, of course, where we've had to use the thing we don't want to use in order to get to the point where we want to be, right? That's what I mean by that bootstrapping process. You've got to somehow start somewhere and then break out of that loop.
That was all for my questions, so I think I can close the recording now. There it is. Goodbye, everyone on the internet.